What is up, guys? Welcome back to Biopilot Arms. Today we've got another news story that's good news for the Second Amendment. Bump stocks, the ban, it's been struck down. It's been long enough, and quite honestly, it should have happened a lot sooner, but you know what? It's finally done. Uh, the Supreme Court struck down the ban on bump stocks because, quite simply, common sense prevailed. Um, for those of you who don't know, what a bump stock is. You've been hiding under a rock. But I'll explain. Basically, it is a mechanism that allows you to bump fire without having to take the weapon off your shoulder. If you've seen those videos of people bump firing from their hip, basically it is you just use forward pressure and you use the recoil to reset the trigger and forward pressure of your other hand to once again pull the trigger. Only you can do that with it on your shoulder because the actual bump stock helps you do that. That's all it is. It's literally a device that allows you to do a technique that you can do without the device. Anyway, guys, so yeah, bump stocks are no longer banned, and we're gonna go over the case really quickly. Pretty straightforward. We're going to read the syllabus because I don't want to read the entirety of the, multiple page Supreme Court ruling. I will link it in the description below if you guys want to actually read the entire thing. It's like 40 plus pages long. I'm not going to read it. I'm just going to read the basics of their decision because they put it in the syllabus. So Garland versus Cargill. The National Firearms Act of 1934 defines a machine gun as any weapon which shoots, is designed to shoot, or can be readily restored to shoot automatically more than one shot without manual reloading by a single function of the trigger. Key phrase is single function of a trigger. With a machine gun, a shooter can fire multiple times or even continuously by engaging the trigger only once. This capability distinguishes a machine gun from a semi-automatic firearm. With a semi-automatic firearm, the shooter can fire only one time by engaging the trigger. Using a technique called bump firing, shooters can fire semi-automatic firearms at rates approaching those of machine guns. Now, you can bump fire with your thumb. There's a video of me doing it somewhere on my channel somewhere. You stick your thumb in the trigger guard, and then you keep your thumb static, and then you pull forward with your left hand on the either foregrip or whatever portion of the firearm that you want to pull forward on, and it pulls the trigger, and then the recoil pushes it back enough to reset the trigger, and as long as you keep that forward pressure, it's just going to keep bumping and firing. That's all that you do. Whereas with the bump stock, it's like a spring-loaded thing that separates the stock from the forward portion of it, and so as long as you keep that forward pressure, you can do it while it's in your shoulder. A shooter who bump fires a rifle using the firearm's recoil to help rapidly manipulate the trigger. Although bump firing does not require any additional equipment, a bump stock is an accessory designed to make the technique easier. A bump stock does not alter the basic mechanics of bump firing, and the trigger still must be released and re-engaged to fire each additional shot. For many years, the ATF consistently took the position that semi-automatic rifles equipped with bump stocks were not machine guns. Of course, and just like the pistol brace ruling, ATF abruptly changed course when a gunman used semi-automatic rifles equipped with bump stocks, fired hundreds of rounds into a crowd in Las Vegas, Nevada, killing 58 people and wounding over 500 more. ATF subsequently proposed a rule that would repudiate its previous guidance and amend its regulations to clarify that bump stocks are machine guns. So again, the ATF, like they always do, are like, you know what? Yeah, we said this was fine the whole time, but now for no reason and with no real legality to do so, we're just gonna change that decision because screw you. So, ATF's rule ordered owners of bump stocks either to destroy or surrender them to ATF to avoid criminal prosecution. I hope that y'all didn't. I hope y'all didn't destroy or surrender them. I know a lot of people did. I know that there's a gun shop that had to destroy, I think it was $2.5 million worth of them from his warehouse. I hope he sues and gets his money back. A guy that I'm thinking of ran a business and he had to surrender like thousands of them. So I hope he gets his money back. So definitely with this decision, he should have grounds to get it back, but I don't know. I'm gonna look into that. I think. Michael Cargill surrendered 2 bump stocks to ATF under protest, then filed suit to challenge the rule under the Administrative Procedure Act. As relevant, Cargill alleged that the ATF lacked statutory authority to promulgate the rule because bump stocks are not machine guns as defined in 5845B. After a bench trial, the district court entered judgment for ATF. The Fifth Circuit initially affirmed but reversed after rehearing en banc. A majority agreed that 5845B is ambiguous as to whether a semi-automatic rifle equipped with a bump stock fits the statutory definition of a machine gun and resolved that ambiguity in Cargill's favor. ATF exceeded its statutory authority by issuing a rule that classifies a bump stock as a machine gun. A semi-automatic rifle equipped with a bump stock is not a machine gun as defined by 5845B because 1. It cannot fire more than one shot by a single function of the trigger, and 2. Even if it could, it would not do so automatically. ATF therefore exceeded its statutory authority by issuing a rule that classifies bump stocks as machine guns. B. A semi-automatic rifle equipped with a bump stock does not fire more than one shot by a single function of the trigger. The phrase function of the trigger refers to the mode of action by which the trigger activates the firing mechanism. No one disputes that a semi-automatic rifle without a bump stock is not a machine gun because a shooter must release and reset the trigger between every shot. And any subsequent shot fired after the trigger has been released and reset is the result of a separate and distinct function of the trigger. Nothing changes when a semi-automatic rifle is equipped with a bump stock. Between every shot, the shooter must release pressure from the trigger and allow it to reset before re-engaging the trigger for another shot. A bump stock merely reduces the amount of time that elapses between separate functions of the trigger. ATF argues that a shooter using a bump stock must pull the trigger only one time to initiate a bump firing sequence of multiple shots. This initial trigger pull sets off a sequence, fire, recoil, bump, fire, that allows the weapon to continue firing without additional physical manipulation of the trigger by the shooter. This argument rests on the mistaken premise that there is a difference between the shooter flexing his finger to pull the trigger and pushing the firearm forward to bump the trigger against the stationary trigger. Moreover, ATF's position is logically inconsistent because its reasoning would also mean that a semi-automatic rifle without a bump stock is capable of firing more than one shot by a single function of the trigger. Yet, ATF agrees that is not the case. ATF's argument is thus at odds with itself. Even if a semi-automatic rifle with a bump stock could fire more than one shot by a single function of the trigger, it would not do so automatically. Section 5845B specifies the precise action that must automatically cause a weapon to fire more than one shot, a single function of the trigger. If something more than a single function of the trigger is required to fire multiple shots, the weapon does not satisfy the statutory definition. Firing multiple shots using a semi-automatic rifle with a bump stock requires more than a single function of the trigger. A shooter must maintain forward pressure on the rifle's front grip with his non-trigger hand. Without this ongoing manual input, a semi-automatic rifle with a bump stock will not fire multiple shots. ATF counters that machine guns also require continuous manual input from a shooter. The shooter must both engage the trigger and keep it pressed down to continue shooting. ATF argues that ATF argues there is no meaningful difference between holding down the trigger of a traditional machine gun and maintaining forward pressure on the front grip of a semi-automatic rifle with a bump stock. This argument ignores that Congress defined a machine gun by what happens automatically by a single function of the trigger. Simply pressing and holding the trigger down on a fully automatic rifle is not manual input in addition to a trigger's function. By contrast, pushing forward on the front grip of a semi-automatic rifle equipped with a bump stock is not part of functioning the trigger. Moreover, a semi-automatic rifle with a bump stock is indistinguishable from the Ithaca Model 37 shotgun, a weapon the ATF concedes cannot fire multiple shots automatically. ATF responds that a shooter is less physically involved with operating a bump stock equipped rifle than operating the Model 37. It explains that once a shooter pulls the rifle's trigger a single time, the bump stock harnesses the firearm's recoil energy in a continuous back and forth cycle that allows the shooter to attain continuous firing. But even if one aspect of a weapon's operation could be seen as automatic, that would not mean the weapon shoots automatically more than one shot by a single function of the trigger. Abandoning the text, ATF attempts to shore up its position by relying on the presumption against ineffectiveness. That presumption weighs against interpretations of a statute that would render the law in a great measure nugatory and enable offenders to elude its provisions in the most easy manner. In ATF's view, Congress restricted machine guns because they eliminate the manual movements that a shooter would otherwise need to make in order to fire continuously, at a high rate of fire as bump stocks do. So ATF reasons, concluding that bump stocks are lawful simply because the trigger moves back and forth, would exalt artifice above reality, enable evasion of the federal machine gun ban. The presumption against ineffectiveness cannot do the work the ATF asks of it. Interpreting 5845B to exclude semi-automatic rifles equipped with bump stocks comes nowhere close to making the statute useless. So, what's all that mean? Pretty much, Supreme Court basically said, hey, look, no, it's not a single function of the trigger to pull it once and then have to use manual input to re-pull the trigger every time it resets because the recoil pushes it back so the trigger resets. So it's not a machine gun, okay? Because a machine gun, you pull it once, one function of the trigger, and it's automatically firing, versus one function of the trigger, reset, one function of the trigger, reset, repeat, rinse and repeat. So, what does this mean? It means that you can buy a bump stock again, which is the very first thing I'm doing when they come back to shelves. Now, I think it was yesterday, there was a proposed vote to ban them through the actual way that you would, which would be the legal way, by introducing legislation, but that also failed, so we don't have to worry about that. Now, to say that that won't happen again is stupid, because they're probably going to try something at a later date to try and actually ban these, so we need to keep an eye out for that. But as of right now, they are once again legal to own. If you didn't throw yours away or destroy yours because you're a true American, you can pull them out of hiding and use them again. And for those of you who either never had one or did get rid of yours and destroyed them, technically, I believe that you could probably try and sue for restitution, but let's face it, it's probably not worth the amount of time that it would take to try and get that, so just go buy a new one. And think more carefully next time about whether or not you should get rid of it or not. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just saying, you know, it's kind of like the pistol brace thing. Like, it wasn't necessarily illegal to own, but you couldn't put it on your gun, and just, like, a lot of people thought about getting rid of them, and some people did get rid of them, and now that's also kind of like you can have them again. So, when it comes to stuff like this, it's kind of up in the air. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm saying do what's best for you, but I know what I'd do. Anyway, guys. So, yeah. What now, here's the interesting part, though, is what does this mean for other things. For instance, the forced reset trigger. Because the forced reset trigger is essentially just like this. It forces the reset of the trigger, so technically it's a different function every time. So this case, the bump stock case, may actually allow us to have forced reset triggers because it's a single function of the trigger. Now, there is the possibility that the forced reset trigger doesn't go the same way because this one specifically with the bump stocks relied on the additional manual input of having to have that left hand or right hand, whichever offhand you're using. If you're shooting left-handed, you're wrong. You're a freak of nature and you're wrong. But whichever offhand you use, that was the manual input, and so you had to have that manual input, otherwise the bump stock wouldn't function correctly. Whereas with a forced reset trigger, you don't have to have that input. It's just pull the trigger. The mechanism forces it to reset, and then you have to do additional input. It's technically additional input because you have to re-pull the trigger every time. It's not keeping your finger static. So I would argue that while it's not the same manual input as bump stocks, it is still additional manual input. And so I would say that realistically, a forced reset trigger would fall under the same argument and the same logic of having to have that additional pull every time being the additional manual input that you have to put in because the mechanism resets it, but you're actually putting in the additional input because you have to actually pull the trigger every time. Theoretically. That's my 2 cents on the forced reset triggers. I think that might go pretty well for us, especially if it's in the Fifth Circuit or goes to the Supreme Court as it sits right now. Anyway, guys, if you liked that video and if you hadn't heard about this yet, please do drop a like and or a comment down below. I will be linking to this PDF so that way you guys can read the entirety if you feel like reading 42 pages. I don't know why you would, but if you want to, it'll be in the description down below. I appreciate each and every one of you guys. Make sure to like and subscribe, and please help me make better content by getting me up to 1,000 subscribers so that way I can actually monetize this crap and use some of that money to buy things to shoot and or blow up for you guys. Anyway, guys, I appreciate each and every one of you guys, and I will see you guys next time.